Tēnā koutou katoa and hello everybody. Welcome to the Lentil Intervention Podcast. My name is Ben Adelberg and I'm coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland.
And g'day, I'm Emma Strutt and I'm currently coming to you from Gungaloo Country in Queensland. And before we dive into our conversation today, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community.
The Lentil Intervention is an Australasian educational advocacy platform dedicated to raising awareness about the current climate and health crisis.
And on this podcast, we invite guests to chat about topics that will inspire you to take action to improve your own health and the health of the planet.
So please subscribe to and share this podcast and visit our website for the full show notes.
And don't forget to buy us a coffee if you'd like to support our work.
Season 3, Episode 2, and here in New Zealand, we've just had another long weekend, which means lots of sales, stuff for sale at a discounted rate for limited time, so get in quick before you think too much about it. Emma, have I set the scene for the next conversation?
I think you have, yes. So today we're joined by Dr. Rochelle Addy, who describes herself as a disillusioned former advocate of green building and rating tools. Rochelle has had a long journey to where she is today, previously working as a green building consultant and the head of sustainability with Lend-Lease in the Middle East. But as she completed her doctoral studies at Auckland University, she realised that all was not quite as well as it seemed in the green building world. So since completing her PhD, Rochelle has dedicated her time to sharing the knowledge that she's gathered over the last 15 years, this year particularly through her Live Better with Less series. Now, I've just got to say, I'm someone who's hopefully going to be building a house sometime later this year. And obviously my partner and I want to try and do things as sustainably as possible because we're well aware that building a house is one of the most resource intensive things a person can do in terms of planetary health. So I'm very, very interested in hearing what Rochelle's work has been all about. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will be too. So on that note, Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Rochelle, we were touching briefly offline just before we started the recording of how we've had very similar paths at some stage of our respective careers, how the hell we have never crossed paths. But we seem to have followed similar journeys in terms of that disillusionment, and we're allowed to swear on this podcast. So I'm going to say first, cutting through the bullshit that we've put ourselves through. But before we go down that, tell us about yourself. You've had a very interesting sort of journey through your life. Your background started off in the world of engineering, then heavily involved in property, and now a bit more philosophical sort of side of things. So, yeah, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your background.
The Cliff Notes version of my CV is typically engineering school as an electrical engineer. Sat in back in the day it was called third professional, so my final year of electrical engineering I sat in a particularly boring integrated circuit engineering class and watched my lecturer derive this equation from first principles that went over 4 chalkboards, and I just sat there and went, this is not for me. But I was almost finished, so I thought I'll just finish this and then I'll never work a day in my life in this field, which I have not done to this day. So I haven't.
I hope my dad's not listening because he is a lecturer and he's a professor in electrical and control engineering. So shout out to my dad.
Yeah. So I graduated with that degree, and then I've never worked a day in my life in that form of engineering. My dad kind of looked at me because he was a civil engineer and went, "What are you going to do?" And then I had no answer for that question. So he went, "All right, come and work for me." And Dad at the time designed marinas for boats. So I ended up working for my dad's company for a couple of years. That was right around the very exciting time of the 2000 America's Cup. And we were designing all the bases for the America's Cup boats and the marinas down in the Viaduct Basin. So I met all the America's Cup teams and had a high old time, and eventually ended up getting a job offer for one of the America's Cup teams to be a project manager. So I skived off overseas and worked for Oracle BMW Racing for a few years before I got a bit sick of that too. And then came back to New Zealand and then worked as a project manager in construction for, say, a decade between here and the UK. And that was the time frame when I became really interested in green building. and wanted to build better or recognize that our footprint on the planet wasn't all it could be and could we do it better, and discovered green building and moved full-time into green building from being a construction project manager to a what you'd call back then a sustainability consultant or a green building consultant when I lived in the Middle East and was working for Lendlease. And so that's when I started to gather my what I call bouquet of accreditations, from LEED to BREEAM to Green Star Australia, Green Star New Zealand, Home Star, added Passive House to that. Never did the Living Building Challenge accreditation, and I've not done well, but at the end of the day, you can get so many of these accreditations that I think they start to become meaningless. And then, as you mentioned in the intro, I started studying the performance of the green building rating tools that I'd used and advocated for around 12 years, and realized that potentially they weren't actually delivering what I'd always assumed they were and always hoped that they would be. And that started me down a two-pathway journey. Like, it was exactly the same time I was studying it academically and becoming disillusioned in practice at the same time. And then that all came to a head about a couple of years ago.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're actually quite involved in like getting this movement up and running locally, and then you've come out the other side of your PhD with a very different view of what you originally had. And I really want to dive into that in just a sec, but maybe let's just set the scene, because this is not a building specific podcast. So starting with the very basics, what are green building rating tools, and how are they supposed to work?
Ooh, that's actually a relatively tough question to answer, I guess, if you're doing it for the layperson. So how would you break that down? So the way we used to define it, so I used to deliver training on behalf of the New Zealand Green Building Council in the Green Star rating tool and Homestar. And one of the ways we would describe it to people in the room is, imagine if you had two bottles of cleaning products and they both look the same, they both have the same claims that they're better for the planet. How do you really know which one is actually better for the planet? Is one better than the other? And the way that you can supposedly tell if one is better for the other is that it's gone through an independent assessment process against a set of criteria. And that's basically what a green building rating tool is. It's just a arbitrary set of criteria that people have agreed on, that someone will then assess a building against and say whether or not it passes. Like, kind of like a warrant of fitness for a car in some ways, although you're not checking the safety of the car, the safety of the building. It's like a list of criteria: yes, no, or in the case of rating tools, gather points and then get a certain level of rating out of it at the other end.
And are they heavily focused on carbon and reducing carbon output, or are they, considering other metrics like water use or chemical residues, or, the amount of plastic waste that's produced in the building process?
So, a long history of green building rating tools is they came out of the UK, and it's been so long since I wrote this paper that I can't remember the exact date. Sometime in the 1990s, I believe it was, from the Building Research Establishment in the UK, and they put together the BREEAM rating tool. And the way that BREEAM works, which is the granddaddy of most rating tools, is it's got a series of different categories, and it will look at energy, water, transport, location. I've actually forgotten the other categories in BREEAM. It's changed over the years, but there's and in LEED, which is the next tool that came out after BREEAM, there's the 5 categories, which are the same kind of things again: energy, water, site, transport, and a 5th, which I can't get on my finger. I really should have pulled up my paper for this. And the categories are not necessarily created equal, and all of this was before the modern carbon movement. And I say modern because the recognition of carbon emissions creating the greenhouse effect has been around for a long, long time before green building rating tools, but it wasn't in the modern vernacular. So these rating tools didn't actually address carbon back in the day, and I would suggest they still don't address carbon to this day, even though they pretend to, because they'll say, well, we're prioritizing energy efficient buildings. However, most of the rating tools you look at these days don't actually focus heavily on what I would call embodied or upfront carbon. So when you're looking at carbon emissions, you will typically have the emissions that are generated when you create a product, so in the manufacturing phase and the construction phase for a building. And then you'll have the operational emissions, which for a building would be the energy it takes to run the building, the water it takes to run the building, and any maintenance that happens. So we tend to split carbon in buildings into two groups, operational or embodied. Now, the green building rating tools that you have right now, yes, they will look at operational energy, but they're very, very light on in embodied carbon, although they are trying to get a bit better. And the other trick with a rating tool is it is a rating tool. So say for BREEAM, you've got good, very good, excellent, outstanding. In the US and LEED, you have certified silver, gold, platinum. In New Zealand for Green Star, we do 4, 5, 6. So there's different levels of rating that you achieve. The way you achieve a rating is you meet some very small amount of minimum requirements, and then you actively target different points. And what most people don't understand, because when they look at these ratings, they might look at, if you go back to those 2 bottles of cleaners that I had, you would assume if they both had a gold rating, then they're both the same kind of building, so they're both the same energy efficiency. Unfortunately, the rating tools don't work that way. So when you're targeting points, you can choose to target points in whatever categories you want. So you may go, you know what, I don't really fancy targeting energy efficiency too heavily in my particular building, so I'm going to skip those points and I'm going to go and target some of the slightly easier ones, maybe around transport and some native planting and some water use and a little bit of management, how we're going to run the building, and get my gold rating that way. So it actually does become very difficult to compare 2 types of buildings that have the same rating because they've targeted different points in the rating tool. And that's the difference between a rating tool and a standard. So a standard, you have to do everything, but in a rating tool, you can pick and choose.
And I think that's where part of the problem is. It's you're choosing what suits. It's almost like the trend now is to be a B certified corporation. And I've looked into that as part of a study I recently did. I had to do a case study, and you couldn't compare one company to another because again, so this company's got this score. What area should they improve, or how do they compared to another, say in the same category, say it's fashion, and again they choose which categories they want to target to make them look good, and then effectively ignore the areas that are quite significant in bringing them down. Now, background to my story is, for most of our listeners, they may or may not know, but I've had a corporate background in sort of the retail property sector, and in 2008, for whom I was employed, I'm not going to mention names now, but I delivered what was believed to be New Zealand's first purpose-built retail premises incorporating the green building design features. There were no rating tools available here in New Zealand, but it was deemed as a Pathfinder project by the New Zealand Green Building Council, and using that as a benchmark. And at the time, 2008, already what you've kind of explained, the word carbon was not in my vocabulary. It was not in, when I was making presentations to other businesses and so on. It was all about energy. It was all about saving cost. Are we going to save water? Are we going to save money on power for lights, for air conditioning? Let's put some bike parks in because that's, that's the transport. That's important. We'll tick some boxes there. No one rode a bike to that store. We'll put in some solar tubes in, and we'll use natural lighting. Well, half time through the year, you're still putting, still switching the lights on. Only now I've realized how much I've greenwashed myself through that whole process. But it's like you say, there's so many tools, whether it's a standard or whether it's a rating tool. There's different standards, the Canadian, the UK, New Zealand. How do we compare? And that's part of the problem, isn't it? You can't actually benchmark yourself against someone else.
You can't using the rating tools, and across the different countries they're incomparable as well. So you'll never have an idea of what's really going on, and I think it's actually a huge problem because one of my bugbears with green building rating tools is I think they act as a bit of I'm not sure if it's a placebo effect or maybe if it's just a Band-Aid. They get people thinking they're doing the right thing and that they go, you know what, I've got a let's say, LEED Gold or a 5 Green Star, my job's done. I've built a good building. And unfortunately, the real truth is you've built a slightly less bad building. You haven't actually built a good building. And until we can build buildings that are within the carbon budget for every country, they're all bad buildings that we can't be affording to build. And to go back and answer Emma's question right at the start, like what kind of building should I be building? I have a horrible answer to this question, which is you shouldn't be building at all.
Okay.
Like we cannot afford to be building new houses. And I will qualify that slightly in that I do believe we should always be building affordable social housing for the people who currently do not have homes. And we should be trying to do those to the carbon budget. But for most people, just go in and buy an existing house. Like, there's quite a few out there. They're all on the market. We don't need to be building big, new, flashy homes using resources and carbon that we can ill afford to put into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
And an important component of all this that we haven't yet touched on, I mean, we're going to start going down these rabbit holes now, so we may as well start with the first one. But when measuring, and this was the flaw that I realized with the project that I had delivered all these years ago, we looked at once the building was complete, and then we measured what was there and then. Okay, this is the output, and this is, we might get some better durability out of this. But it's everything that happens before. What are the materials that we are using to create this building? And that certainly was never part. Now I look back and think, gosh, some of the fabrics or the materials that we used, it's way worse, because whether they more, they're rarer resources, where did they come from, how were they manufactured, that whole journey, is that actually part of the tools now? The whole life cycle cost from
Not really.
From the earth?
So they're optional points, so you can choose to do a life cycle analysis if you wish to, but it's not necessarily complicated, but it's a bit of work. So would every, say, New Zealand Green Star or Homestar project do a life cycle analysis? No, very rare. And even when you do a life cycle analysis, you have to realize that, quite frankly, all you're really looking at this point in time, because we don't have the data, is some of the big picture items. So it's the envelope of the building, which is the roof, walls, floor, even services. So for big commercial buildings, things like HVAC, power, all the electrical, all the hydraulics, none of that's really included in the LCA. So when you're getting down to nuts and bolts about kitchen benches, granite, sofas, basins, half of that's not included in LCAs yet because all these manufacturers haven't done environmental product declarations. So we can't include the data. And when you are looking at the the problem is we're all trying to run around after our own tails proving things with data, which I love. I love data, don't get me wrong. But we all know what the answers are. It's like we need to stop building in concrete, steel, and aluminium and glass. And we need to start building in natural building products, if we're building at all, which is going to be straw, hemp, bamboo, timber. And that's the answer to all of our problems. Only build what you absolutely have to build. So not the buildings that we want to necessarily be building. Like, I want a new home, I want a new office. Our old office is actually just fine, but we want to do a retrofit because we want to be more modern. Or company like PwC, who I see move buildings all the time because they've got to be in the biggest, flashiest, newest building in the city all the time. It's like, why? What was wrong with the old new flash building that you had a few years ago? What was wrong with the retrofit of that office? What, you need new desks? What was wrong with your old desks? So,
and the worst part is we're destroying to put up something new.
Yeah, pull it down.
So the waste component.
It's terrible. I mean, I can't remember the exact statistics. In fact, I don't even know if anyone really knows the statistics, but you get it bandied around that there's somewhere between 40 to 70% of all waste that goes to landfill is from the construction industry. Yeah. So depending on where you are in the world and what tip you're looking at probably. But it's hands down, if you look at what goes on construction sites, it's absolutely terrifying. I was building a house with my ex-husband in Beachlands, and I walked my dog one day and we went past another project that was just around the corner, and the skip bin was right by the site fencing. And I looked in there and there were 2 plumbing pieces. So it was like a S-bend or a U-bend, and they were brand new in their plastic packaging, just sitting in the skip. And I sort of just stopped and thought for a second. I went, okay, so somebody somewhere has extracted the oil from the earth through an oil rig, and then they have shipped that to a refinery, and then that's been refined into a product, and then that's probably been shipped to another refinery to get it to the right level of thing, and then it's probably gone to someone who in a different country, maybe China, who's then created molds and poured into this to make this product, which will then have been shipped somewhere else to have its wrapper put around it, and then it's probably been shipped down to New Zealand, and then it will have been trucked to the distribution centre, and then it's gone to the plumbing shop, and then it's come to the site just to have the plumber throw it straight in a skip bin, so then it will get trucked to landfill. And I went, wow, what an epic waste of the world's resources, time, and effort. And what really worried me was that nobody thought that was a problem.
Yep.
At all. It was just normal. It's like, sure, here's a brand new thing that no one's ever used ever, and we'll throw it in the bin.
But that's it across all industries, isn't it? I mean, how many people chuck out an item of clothing that they've never worn and they bought it on a whim?
Oh, my personal new pet peeve in the world is going to make you laugh. Phone cases. Have a stepdaughter who is just on the mission of getting new phone cases all the time. And I sit there and I'm literally chomping on my tongue not to get involved in the conversation. It's like, but Dad, it's only like $3 and it will just come from China and it's fine. And it's like, oh my God, we are doomed as a species if this is what the next generation thinks is a good use of the world's resources, like replacement phone covers. And she's got, I don't know, 8 in a drawer that they never touched and wants a new one every time.
And meanwhile, the phones are actually quite tough as they are. I mean,
have one. I understand. I drop my phone all the time. Protective case helps keep the electronics working, but just for fashion purposes and to be cool at school, to be continually replacing phone covers, I think that probably really signifies the issues we've got as society.
All right, so bringing it just back to building before we move on to your main passion these days. A question about all the existing structures then, if we're really trying to avoid building new, and of course we should be wherever possible, what about old buildings that just don't have, like, they're not up to scratch in regards to ventilation and humidity and heat?
It doesn't have to be old. New Zealand
that's true.
building.
That's very true. But, you know, we've got an ageing population, couple that with a warming climate, potentially increase exposure to things like zoonoses. Like we've seen that this can be big trouble. If we're not careful, this could turn into a massive problem. So what do builders, what are architects, what's the government got to do here to kind of get things up to scratch?
Can I just jump in quickly before Rochelle
You
answers
always do,
this?
Ben. You always do.
And I want to add to this. It was a newspaper headline this morning, Transmission Gully. And so for most that don't know, it's a new piece of highway, Wellington, in the Wellington area. Massive debacle, well over budget. I mean, we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars. It was late, it's finally ready, and now they've ripped up half of it because it was built poorly. Same thing with the bike path down here on Tamaki Drive. It's a bike path I used to go on my electric skateboard, brand new, full of bumps, full of this and that. It's going to be redone. So to add to Emma's question, what are we going to do about how we build in terms of quality?
I don't have an answer, because the answer is you have to retrofit to fix existing houses. The problem with retrofitting is, in order to actually take the rubbish that we've got and make it healthy, and I'm a big advocate of healthy homes, you've got to do a lot. So you're pretty much probably ripping off claddings, maybe roofs, and your exterior recladding, which is almost the same as building a new house. And that is a problem because we don't have the resources on the planet to do it. So you kind of, and I actually sit back when I'm in my quiet moments and I think this through as an existential crisis. I'm like, what do you do? Do you doom people to living in shitty houses that are making them sick? Do you go forth and emit the carbon and then doom them anyway because they'll be dying from climate change related issues? Do we just all need to plain old stop? Maybe. And I've had a really interesting conversation with some of my colleagues around the carbon budget for housing. And this is New Zealand specific information. But in New Zealand, typically the carbon emissions from our country, say they're 100%, but from the building and construction industry, it's around about 10% of all our emissions, with the overwhelmingly biggest sectors being transport and agriculture. That's where all New Zealand's carbon emissions come from. And so I was having a chat to quite a high profile guy, and I said to him, look, you've just done these really cool projects and we've done LCAs on them. Were they within the carbon budget? And he's like, no. I was like, could they be? And he went, no. I was like, do you think we can build in New Zealand and build something that's actually within the carbon budget allowance? And he went, no. The only way we will ever be able to start constructing within the carbon budget in New Zealand is if other sectors start using less carbon so we can reallocate more carbon to construction. And that's the problem you're looking at right now. It's like there's not enough carbon. There's not enough ability to emit carbon for us to build more and fix our housing.
And that's because we're importing the majority of our materials, isn't it? That's what's pushing up that carbon.
I don't know the answer to that. It will be there'll be manufacturing for sure. There'll be shipping. Shipping is often actually less than you think. But a lot of it will probably be the way that we build as well. So we do these horrendous bespoke one-off designs all the time rather than taking one design, making it efficient and just replicating. We don't do enough prefab. We don't build out of the materials we should be building out of, which are the natural, rapidly renewable materials: bamboo, hemp, straw, earth.
And we've got huge houses too, don't we? Like we've got some of the largest, at least in Australia, some of the largest houses in the world. We don't need all of that space.
No, you don't. And they're getting bigger, same as America, and New Zealand's exactly the same. I mean, I remember when I was doing Homestar assessments a few years ago, and there was this one particular house that I was assessing, and it came across my desk. And I counted the bathrooms, and I wrote it down and went forward, and I went, what? I went back and I recounted. I was like, there are 5 bathrooms in this 5-bedroom house. Like every bedroom had its own bathroom. It's like, that's just the most insane overuse of resources I think I've ever seen. You just don't need that many bathrooms. But when you get down to it, and this is when you start thinking about all sorts of things, it's like, okay, well, does everyone really need their own kitchen? Does everyone really need their own laundry? You certainly probably don't need 2 living rooms. You might want them because you don't want to listen to your kids, but do you really need it? Like, how many hours a day do you use your laundry? How many hours a day do you use your kitchen? Could you share? Could we do some communal, intergenerational co-housing projects where there are community kitchens, where you do have community laundries, where you can go and just everyone shares the washing machine. So instead of everybody having their own washing machine, ditto for lawnmowers and chainsaws. So you go for tool libraries instead. I was contemplating whether or not we should buy a water blaster the other day because we've been borrowing a friend's. And I went, why wouldn't we just keep borrowing someone's? We don't need our own one. So
But then countries like the UK, I mean, it's normal to, go walk in the rain with your dirty laundry and go to a laundromat, and it's those kind of shared facility amenities rather. Sure, because your living space is small, but again, like you say, do you need all that? Because you build 5 bathrooms for 5 bedrooms, and then down the line, a bathroom does need to be worked on, might need a bit of an upgrade, or there's wear and tear. But now you got wear and tear on 5 bathrooms.
5 of them. Yeah.
So there's more waste, more going to landfill, and then you need more to replace more. When, like you say, are they being used efficiently? And it's not a hotel, is it? A home.
Well, it's also, I mean, God, I'm starting to feel old, but when I say the phrases, I remember when I was young. But I actually do find myself ruminating on this these days. I was like, when I was young, we didn't have anything coming from overseas. So there were very few overseas toys. There was no overseas clothing. We didn't go out for dinners. Like a treat was fish and chips on a Friday night. And you didn't have the rampant imports that you do now. And our expectations of life were, I think, a lot lower and a lot smaller. So my mum tells me the story of when I was little and how they couldn't afford, when they built their new house, they couldn't afford to finish it. So there were no fences. Half the house wasn't painted. They lived in the front bit, and they just left the back bit until Dad had earned the money so he could finish off the back bit of the house. I don't know how many people who are, say, starting out with their first child would be willing to compromise these days. They all want that, or we have to have 2 lounges, we have to have this, and we have to have this, and this is all we must. And it's like, well, really, you can actually get away with not much if you're willing to really consider what is actually necessary in your life. And there is the beautiful becoming a minimalist movement that really starts to challenge you and get you to question a lot of these things. Like, would you rather have you and your partner working full time, never seeing your child, and they're in childcare and school, so you can afford a big house, mortgages, 2 cars, overseas holidays? Or would you maybe work smaller hours and spend more time with your family, but actually have less physical possessions? And then the other thing that I keep thinking about, my grandfather passed away during COVID in a rest home, and he was 95. So he's had a really good life. But I was thinking about him and all the things that he'd gathered through his life and through his house and his furniture. Because when he passed away, we got handed a bag with like a photo and a pair of pajamas and maybe a watch. And I just went, wow, is that what it comes to? Like, when you die, your family gets given a paper bag with like 3 things. So why do you spend all this time and effort trying to gather all the rest of it when you leave? You can't take it with you, and it probably doesn't really mean anything to anybody else anyway.
Yeah.
That little, I always rethink about that when I'm thinking about a purchase and just go, is it really worth my time, spending my time in this way to earn this money to spend it on that thing? Or could I be spending my time in a better way?
And I think that's the thing people forget often, because, we've got shopping available to us 24/7 now. It's almost a way to kill time, but no one actually stops to think about the time it takes to earn that money to buy that thing. You could be completely changing your life and spending that time in different ways with your family, making memories. Like, it's a bit of a disconnect, isn't it, this whole system these days?
That's what credit cards are for.
Yeah.
You don't have that pile of money sitting next to you thinking, oh, that's all I've got. I've got to be careful. A credit card gives you this limitless, it doesn't matter if I go over, well, there's that credit, right? Like,
tap and go.
I can just buy without having to think about it. And now you've got that other problem in society where people are drowning in debt. I mean, that's a completely different conversation, but that's part of the problem. I mean, it's one of many.
One of the key causes. And I do feel, I've been doing a lot of reading on this, listening to a lot of podcasts about what is money. And it's really interesting, because I think that question is the crux of all our environmental issues, is what money is, and the way we view it actually causes so many downstream problems. And the one definition that I've heard recently that really got me thinking is money in itself. Money is not, it's not important, but it's actually just a medium of exchange, and it is a medium of exchange for our time. And so we use money to exchange our time for somebody else's time. And it's that whole interaction. Once you understand that when I've got stuff or that I'm actually giving up my time, that is the most precious resource, because you've only got a certain amount of time on the planet. And how you choose to spend that and what you devote it to and what you do with it is probably the most precious thing, the precious resource you can have. And so many of us are frittering it away, just scrolling on phones and social media, and earning or working at jobs that we don't want to have things that we don't really need, killing the planet in the process. And if we could all back off from that a little bit and go, do I need that? No. So then I don't have to work 40 hours a week. Then I don't have to do this, and hallelujah, we all have a better quality of life.
That's along the principles of, we're really digressing here, but Henry Thoreau with his views on the materialistic culture. What do you actually need? What are our basic needs? It's what? It's food, it's shelter, clothes?
I'd say probably companionship as an animal species. Clothes, I think, depends on the climate you're in.
Clothing. True. Oh, I mean, modest. I mean, in society.
Well, in society, that's a social.
Other than a few beaches,
but necessity, though, right?
Yeah. And what is the other one? Fuel, I think, and that's a bit of a. You do need energy. I mean, and this goes back to Emma's earlier point. You do need certain comforts in a home. You do need warmth in winter. You do need, maybe for older people, you do need cooling, cooking food, things like that. So yeah, that it's like you say, precious time. Yet we're in a society that's influenced, hence influences in social media, and that's creating this ecological strain that we have on our planet. And this kind of leads us into our next little segment now, into, I guess, your journey of that whole self-realization and getting to a point where, okay, you need to, well, I don't know. Tell us, what inspired you to go down this path of first starting with this whole 365 no bullshit ways to save the world? What got you to there?
I would love to be able to say it was some kind of high-minded altruistic purpose, but the brutal truth would be that probably the year before I'd been very critical of green building rating tools on social media, trying to get the message across. And I was negative, and I was trying to pull them down and point out all their flaws. And I don't even remember if someone talked to me about it or if I just realized to myself, I was like, you're just being a negative Nancy all the time, Rochelle. Rather than telling people what doesn't work, why don't you tell them what does? So I made a resolution for the next year. I was like, well, let's try and actually showcase things that will make a difference or that might actually help and get people to change their mind. So I have a personal viewpoint, and this is part of the problem with green building rating tools again, is a lot of people skip. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the adoption curve. So you've got the innovators and then you've got the early adopters and it goes down to the later bits and pieces. I feel like there's, in the green building rating tools, it's a similar kind of curve, and it's actually for lots of things where people skip straight to the how and they just go, and that's like the top of the bell curve. It's like, this is how you do it. This is how you do it. But they forget to tell people this is why you need to do it. And so the people just belt out there and say, you need a 5 green star, you need this, you need this, you need this, because this will save the planet. And they go, but why does the planet need saving? And what are the actual issues? And actually, therefore, would that be the how, or do we need to do something else? So I started to, and this is what this year is about as well, I wanted to circle back a little bit and go, okay, so what really are the issues? Like, why do we need to live better with less? Or why do we need to save the world? What are the burning problems? What are the real issues that are going on? And therefore, how do we address those issues? Because a lot of the stuff that people talk about, say light bulbs or even energy efficiency in some ways, in some places, they're all red herrings. They're not the real issues because people don't want to talk about the big scary issues because there is a way of solving them, but no one wants to do that. So we focus on the small things that we think we can solve, like the low-hanging fruit, and then just let everything else carry on in the background, and we'll all end up getting very hot and burning.
I mean, I'll say from my perspective, having come from the corporate background and probably going to go back to it at some point, but for them, and I've seen this firsthand, and this is the frustration, is my time back in, the 2000s, you push for positive change and you might get it across the line. And then a few years later, you look back and you think, why is that company not doing it anymore? Because at the end of the day, for these big corporates, it's all about, it's a show. That's all it is. It's a big peacock with big fancy feathers. Look at me, I'm the grandest. Yeah. When you say they want to go down straight away, the how do I get there? How can I market this and say, hey, we got a 6-star rating. We're cool. Come work for us. Yes, it's better for staff. They love the environment. No, that's staff retention so that, again, you can save on costs. Yes. It's cost driven. Really? There's no real intent, because if there was real intent, why don't you switch your big fancy lights on your external signage off at night? Why do you need them on at night? Who needs to see it at 3 a.m.? No, because it's a marketing thing. It's profit driven. And that's part of the problem with all this.
Well, you've hit the real problem on the planet is capitalism. The capitalistic system is what is driving the consumerism, model, the overconsumption, and that is one of the key issues that we face on the planet. And that's what needs to change if we want to try and survive. We need to replace capitalism with something else. And the monetary system needs to change because the inflationary monetary system is also driving the overconsumption, and just all the free and cheap, easy money that's floating around just lends people to more discretionary spending.
But that was one of the most depressing realizations that I came to as I actually learnt more about sustainable living and green living and stuff. Like you go into this with bright eyes and you think, okay, I'm going to eat less meat. I'm not going to drive my car. I'm going to do all of these changes. And if everyone does this too, like we can make some difference. But when push comes to shove, it is about our capitalist society, it's about changing to more like of a circular or donut model.
Local. Yeah.
How do we do that? Like, that's political. Like, what can we do? You know, like, it's disheartening.
I suppose sometimes there's a few things that give me hope, because I sit there and just go, excuse my language, we're all fucked. Because everyone's too self-interested. No one wants to give up their empress lifestyles to go without their phones and their TVs and their Netflix and their HelloFresh, and, you know, make my life harder so I live a bit more like my grandmother did to save the planet. It's like, well, the chances are it probably won't go horribly wrong in our lifetime, so we'll probably be okay. So we can just keep on going the way we are and just kick the can down the road. But there's a few things that I think about that give me a little bit of hope. So, you know, there's the whole analogy, if you drop a pebble in the water and the ripples, so it'll filter into create something big. The butterfly whose wings flap and then create a hurricane. And there's the beautiful YouTube video that I watch upon occasion because it gives me hope, of the man who planted a tree on a desert island every day for 30 years and reforested the whole thing, and it's now a teeming spot of biodiversity. So one person can make a difference, and then if that one person inspires even just one other person to make the same changes, eventually, or if they inspire two, you know, it's exponential growth in a positive way. So even though I get despondent on a daily basis, I don't give up hope. You just got to, even in the face of doom, keep on plugging away at it and just say, yeah, well, even if no one else makes the change, my little change makes a difference.
Yep. That comes back to grounded hope, which is a conversation we've had in previous podcasts. So that's a really good kind of nugget to take away. There's always something to hold on to and something to work towards, I suppose.
Well, my answer to myself is I can tell my children at least I tried. And I can teach them, right? And my poor little kids, you know, they'll want to go into $2 stores and buy plastic. I'm like, no, it's just cheap plastic. And they get so many no, we can't have that. It's full of plastic. No, you can't have that. No, you can't have that. No, do you really want to do that? That's killing the planet.
Such a killjoy.
Constant listening. Things like balloons at birthday parties. Can we have no, you can't have balloons.
Oh, that's another whole podcast in itself in terms of the effects it has on marine life and everything else. Sure. But yeah. But now, okay, so 365 No Bullshit Ways to Save the World. That was your 2021 project. So yes. 365, every day you put a post up with a thought, an idea, a tip or something. Okay, I'm going to make you think back to 365 posts. What were some key messages that, you know, you would have had, like, okay, I've got my top 5, but I've got to spread it out with other stuff. Well, what would have been some key items that...
How can there be a few key ones? It's a wicked problem we're addressing here.
So being a geek, I have a spreadsheet, so I've got them all in a huge spreadsheet.
And she's probably rated them according to how many likes. These are the most popular ones. See, Emma, I told you. I'll give an answer.
I'll tell you what, I know exactly what the most popular one was, and it was the carbon footprint of materials. For building materials, and it got so much engagement. Actually, one of them later on may have overtaken it, but I remember at the time just kind of going, wow, this post is just going crazy, because it listed the carbon footprint of common building materials like concrete, carpet, and all the rest of it, and that got a lot of engagement. So a lot of people were interested in that. Of course, you've always got to be careful, because that was, I think it was on a weight. I can't remember if it was on a weight basis or a per square meter basis, but depending on the standardization you use, the results are going to change, of course, right?
Yeah.
And there was an interesting research done by brands, because it always shocked me as well. So when we first started doing LCAs, they did a life cycle analysis of the Now home, which was meant to be a very forward-thinking, sustainable green home in Auckland in 2008. Still a pretty good house to this day, to be honest. Anyway, they did an LCA on it, and the material that had the highest embodied carbon footprint for the house was concrete, the concrete slab. But what do you think the second one was? The second highest embodied carbon of all the materials that go into a house?
Steel?
Carpet.
But now, synthetic or wool?
That doesn't matter. And the interesting thing was, it's because of the replacement cycle of carpet. So it's replaced on average every 7 years. And when you add that up over the life cycle, it really adds up.
In retail especially, and I'm guilty. I'm guilty working for corporates that, after 4 years, we got to refit the store. And one of the first things, here's an interesting sort of observation. Okay, I'll say who it was. One of the corporates I used to work for was ANZ Bank. And at the time that I worked for them, they acquired the National Bank, two very different brands. National Bank was owned by Lloyd's in the UK. And they spent money in their fit-outs. And their carpets was broadloom wool. Whereas ANZ, and still to this day, cheap as anything, synthetic, after a year, it looks worn, it's horrible, carpet tiles. Whereas the National Bank, their main flagship store on the corner of Queen and Victoria Street in Auckland CBD, so the highest foot traffic in the country, flagship store, 20 years on, I kid you not, that carpet still looked great.
Wow.
Wool, broadloom. Whereas ANZ, cheap shit, and there's your problem. Yep. That high turnover of it needs to be replaced. And I guess what's also pushing up is the glues that go into the makeup of the carpet. And synthetic is what? It's plastic, right? So more. I mean, we can go down the ethical path, of wool versus synthetic, but from a waste point of view, from an energy intensive, 100%. So I can see why carpet. And also, we don't make carpet in New Zealand anymore, I think, unless that's changed again. But at one point we did, and then we didn't. So bringing in from China would also add to that.
My biggest tip would be don't have carpet in a house. Any house I have, I would get rid of carpet. It is
allergies is a big thing.
Health hazard, absolute health hazard. So I did a whole paper on dust mites as part of my PhD as well, and the ability for them to grow on carpet. I remember watching some videos of what dust mites looked like with my PhD supervisor, and I went home that day, ripped all the bedding off my bed and started vacuuming my mattress. I was so grossed out. So if you can avoid carpet in a house, go for hard floors.
But our homes are built so poorly that isn't it one of the cheaper way of insulating a home rather than ripping up the floor and putting insulation, just put carpet on top?
It depends. Well, it doesn't really give you that much insulation, to be honest.
Tongue in cheek, but yeah.
But you could, you can do it a much better way. Any home I ever built would have underfloor insulation. I'd do timber flooring, so it would be timber framing rather than a concrete slab on poles, and then insulated underneath, and then hard floors on top.
But Rochelle, that won't work with underfloor heating that you might want in the house.
You need underfloor heating if you've designed it properly, so that solves that problem.
Yeah. So carpet, who would have thought? Straight after concrete, not steel, not aluminium even.
No, not in the Now House, and not in most other normal, typical housing construction carpet, just because of the amount of time you're going to go replacing it for wear and tear. Whereas if you had some good quality timber floors, maybe some cork tiles in the kitchen, or if you have to go ceramic, which are horrible on your feet, you'll be healthier. You'll have less dust, less allergies in your house, and you will have a lower carbon footprint. So for me, that's just a win-win-win. So I always tell people, get rid of the carpet. Carpet, and she'll probably hate me.
Olden homes. There's nothing more satisfying that you renovate a home and you pull up this shitty carpet and there's this beautiful floors. It's just mind-boggling.
I used to know this information back in the day. So apparently, and I found this out when I was doing my PhD research, old manor houses in the winter, they would roll up all the carpets and just live with the hard floors, because in the winter it's when it gets damp and moldy, and that's when you're going to start thriving with dust mites and get mold in your carpets. And then they'd bring them out again, like the rugs, in the warmer seasons. So, we've forgotten a lot of the knowledge that we used to have in our modern society and our drive to keep up with the Joneses.
Have we forgotten, or is it
probably been marketed out of it, right?
Yeah, because that doesn't make a profit as much as, it's like the light bulb cartel, isn't it?
Oh my God, I couldn't believe it when I found that out this week.
That's right. I remember reading that from your posts, but it's something I've known. It's the same thing. It's where there's an opportunity to do good. It's like, no, hang on, but then we're going to lose profit. Tell our listeners a little bit about that, Rochelle.
Oh, that was a staggering one where it was a planned obsolescence moment where the light bulb manufacturers from a number of countries, I want to say in the 1930s, but I'd have to check the post again for the date because I've been writing a new one about the 1930s. And they all got together and they standardized lamps so that they could, have a standardized system around the world. But in doing that, they made a limit on the number of lamp hours that you could have per lamp. And they reduced it from 2,000 to 1,000 in a beautiful moment of planned obsolescence, so that you'd have to buy lights more frequently for your light bulbs. Sorry, light bulbs for your lights more frequently, even though you can design them to last longer.
And
they
you'd be
would
fined.
People. Fine the manufacturers that weren't producing lamps to the limited lamp hours. Oh, just beautiful.
And if we think it's just the light bulb industry, it'll be everywhere. It'll be absolutely everywhere.
But in this day and age, with what we've got to achieve in terms of planetary health, the fine should be the other way around.
Oh,
they should
100%.
be getting fined if they've got... Yeah, it's ridiculous.
So you've moved on from that to this year's project called, I think the full thing you've called it is working to make the world a better place each and every day.
No, that's my mission in life.
That's your mission in life.
Yeah.
Live better with less.
Live with better with less.
Live better with less.
So many cool acronyms. I don't know. I mean,
just trying to get through each day without the despondency of realizing we're all doomed. So as long as I know that I'm doing something every day that makes the world a better place, then, and it's as small for me as making someone smile or picking up a piece of litter. It's like, yep, I've made the world a better place today. But their live better with less idea is to try and, right at the start of the year, to try and do that education and inspiration section, which is just telling people this is why we need to do this. Like, I am going to tell you how to live better with less later on in the year, but I don't want to skip the why it's important. Like, these are the big problems that we're facing. These are the real issues, not the perceived issues, but the real issues that we're looking at, like capitalism, like inflation, like the planetary boundaries, which are part of the why. And then towards, the middle of the year and the end of the year, we'll just be digging into this is how you can go about living better with less. So you actually don't need to live worse. I actually think we live worse with more. And I want to try and teach people who can live better with less.
I'd always cherish experience over materialistic items. If there's money, use it to have an experience, travel, see the world, get in nature, get outside. And
Absolutely.
be bogged down by electronics and look what happens, Rochelle. Your camera doesn't work. So
my camera doesn't work.
We should have done this outside.
We could have done it in a forest.
Yeah.
And sometimes some of the most beautiful things that you can do are just for free. So Jared and I, during our kid-free week in the holidays, I mean, yes, we did drive. We have an EV, and we did drive it down to Rotorua. And Rotorua is a hotbed of tourist attractions, and there were so many places you could go and spend your money. And I will put my hand up and say we did get a massage, which was lovely, which is probably still a bit of an experience. But everything else we did was paddleboarding on the lake and hiking through the forests. And that was it. And then just sitting out in nature and eating. And I don't think we spent a penny on the luge or the Zorb or so many of the other places you can go and spend money. And we certainly don't shop.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. If you think back, Ben, you're probably the same. Like, if I think back about the places I've travelled to, it's the places, not the things that I bought while I was there, that you remember and you cherish.
It's the natural beauty, right? Like, we spent probably 2 hours on I think it was Rotomar, trying to find glowworm caves, just paddling in and out of every cave we could find, going, is this the glowworm cave? No, this is the cave. We had the best time just mucking around in nature. Slow. And I'm a big fan. This is why I say live better with less, and just everyone slow down. So whenever I can, I will take the slowest form of transport, whether walking, biking, scootering. So my poor son has to catch a school bus. It's down the end of Onua Road. I'm not sure how many Ks it is, but all the other parents on the school bus, they drive their kids to the bus stop. No, Nicholas has to ride a bike with me. And we've got an EV. So, I could drive our EV down there to catch the bus. But he has to get on a bike and bike up and down all the hills to get to the school bus, because I believe that's part of the journey of life, is slow down and look at what's around you.
And the health benefits that come from that as well. It's all tied in together.
It's the physical movement and look, this again could be another whole show, but that, my whole school career and university career, I mean, granted, my parents probably paid a bit more to live in a suburb that was that close, but I walked my whole life to school and uni, and it is better for your health because you're moving.
Yeah.
Sometimes
you see so many things,
and that's exactly it. You experience
And it
things
would
a
have
lot.
helped you with your study too, with your concentration levels, if you'd done a bit of physical activity before you got
I
to
should have
study.
walked further then.
Turn the energy up. And
I was too buggered.
I'm always so impressed by some of the serendipity that occurs when you're just outside walking, biking. Some of the best conversations I've had have occurred at like traffic lights when I've been walking around the city trying to go in between meetings, or biking and someone pulls up beside you and you just end up having this beautiful little chat about something that's completely unexpected and random.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. You follow the threads, it's all interrelated, isn't it? Like, you're more connected to your community, you're healthier if you're getting outside more often, you're emitting less carbon into the environment. It's just all around a better way to live, basically.
And that's why we always say, personal health, planetary health, they're effectively one and the same sort of embodied, envelope. You can't segregate the two. And everything we've spoken about here impacts both our personal and planet health. And it's so important to recognize that as a start. So when we talk about the how, the why, rather, that's why, because it's not just about a building that will use, we're going back to the building thing again, but, it might use less power or less, consume less, but it's what's also better for us being in that little cocoon, in that, in the home or in the office. So, Rochelle, to start wrapping things up, what would be some key what would be some of the biggest impacts we can make? We've touched on a lot of elements, but what would be some of the big things? Again, and I think people still have, after this whole conversation, people are still thinking, okay, but what's still a better home? Or what can I still do? People might have more questions now. But if we're now to start making some choices, some decisions, some big things, based on what you've already put up and spoken about, what would be some of those big ticket items from your perspective?
The science says, in this order generally, have one less child. It's a tough one. Stop eating meat. Stop eating seafood. Stop consuming dairy. Get rid of your cars. Those would be my top 5.
And we didn't even talk about any of those things, but we wholeheartedly agree.
When you look at, especially in the New Zealand centric landscape, and it's probably similar for most other countries, the difference in those countries will be the dirtiness of their electrical grids. But transportation and agriculture are usually the huge or the biggest impacts of a country in terms of carbon emissions. Having more people obviously means usually using more resources. So that's a tough one. You just have 2 kids instead of 3, 1 instead of 2. That you're gonna not have a consumer. But when you look at the amount of energy and effort it takes to produce 1 kilogram of meat for the amount of calories that we get out of a kilogram of meat, the math just doesn't add up. So I don't necessarily advocate 100% never eating meat again, because if you've got a regenerative farm, and there is a lot of really good science about the positive impact that grazing cattle can have on landscapes. And you can still do that. You don't have to eat the meat. Like, you could still be grazing cattle just for the benefit of the planet to help regenerate landscapes. But if you are going to have to eat meat because you're that way inclined, then that's the kind of meat you need to be hunting out. It is from a regenerative organic farm that's just low impact. I don't think anyone should be eating seafood unless you've gone out and caught it on a line yourself using a really low impact way of doing that. And even
or you're an island community that has always relied on that as a source of
if you're a subsistence farmer.
Yeah.
Unless you're using dynamite to do it.
Yeah.
And those are communities that have known how to fish sustainably. For centuries. And going back to your point
commercially caught seafood, you shouldn't. Commercially caught or farmed seafood, you should not consume.
I think the key word there is commercial, isn't it?
Yeah.
And back to your earlier point about cattle. Why cattle? Why not have wild animals back doing what they were meant to do in the ecosystem? And that's We were wholeheartedly agreeing in New Zealand. We've spoken about this. We've had episodes dedicated to this, the destructive nature of the dairy industry in New Zealand, especially.
Yeah.
That contributes to the transport as well. All those milk trucks every single day on our roads, and the quality, the degradation of our water, the whole ecosystem. But
the trick the trick is not to replace it with something else, though. So if you consume a lot of milk in your diet, you can't suddenly just replace, and we can't all just go out and stop buying dairy and start buying oat milk or soy milk or something, because we're just going to have another huge environmental impact as people go, okay, so I can't farm cows anymore, so now I'm going to do soy or dairy. You actually need to consume less. So you need to cut down on your consumption of these things, as well as then if you can cut it out, great, but you can't just switch. So don't just go, okay, I'll stop drinking dairy milk and I'll start drinking coconut milk. It's like, okay, well, just cut right back and then replace for something better.
Consumerism in general, I think, is the theme. And we touched on planned obsolescence. So there's not a whole lot we can do from our end. If you buy something and it breaks, well, what are you going to do?
Just don't buy it.
Well, yeah.
Or take it to the men's shed to get repaired.
Go buy it secondhand to start with, and then if it breaks, you go get it repaired. And that's the things with cars as well. So it's like, okay, so stop driving an internal combustion engine, but don't go out and buy an EV. Just don't have a car if you can. Most people, you'd be surprised how little. I mean, this sounds awful. Here I am preaching. We have 3 EVs in our front yard at the moment for various insane reasons, and the problem is none of them get driven. So it's so rare that those cars actually leave the property. It's ridiculous. And I am actively working towards, certainly, because I don't think I could convince Jared to get rid of his Tesla, but to have a 1-car household, if not a none.
I mean, look, from my perspective, it started off from living in Brisbane and then continuing what I call it an experiment, but it's now my way of life, is I no longer own a car. And when I need to do a trip, I go and rent one.
That's exactly what I'd like to do.
And that's just way cheaper. It doesn't, because for the most part, I specifically live in a more expensive suburb because I have more amenities around me, which means I walk to the supermarket, I walk places, which means I'm physically more active rather than being lazy. Yep. 500 meters, I'll drive to the supermarket. No, I'm going to walk there and carry some groceries. That's my workout.
Or bike.
Or bike if you want to balance your groceries on the way home. But that's the thing. It's
life tip. Bike baby seats. You know how you get bike seats for babies on the back? They are brilliant for schlepping groceries.
Or get those trolley bikes, with
the
cargo bikes. That's it. Oh, we can have a whole conversation on bikes then. Rochelle, this has been refreshing because it's been an honest conversation. It's something we always endeavor to have, but we want to have more real, honest conversations. Because we need to. It's simple. It's a simple reason. We need to stop pretending. We need to stop hiding behind what we think we know is the truth. But hey, convenience is usually what stops. It's our lifestyle. I like my comforts. So let's not ruin that. But no, we need to get out of that because we've said it last year. We ended off the year on a big episode about the reality of where this planet is heading. If we don't take action, that's it. We're done. So thank you, Rochelle. We really appreciate that.
You're welcome. And I'm not going to say it's not hard. It's tough to really face up and go, I need to give up a lot. We all need to give up a lot. And a lot of changes to my lifestyle, which most people would think is for the negative, in order to live in a way that means we can survive.
But we've got so much to gain, and we have to do it.
So thank you so much, Rochelle, for coming onto the show. We really, really appreciate your time. A shame we couldn't see you through the lens, but it's been an absolute treat. So thank you so much.
I'll go get my IT repaired. Unless it was some planned obsolescence by, who was it? To make me buy another laptop within a year.
There you go. Thanks so much, Rochelle. We really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Lentil Intervention podcast. If you found this interesting, make sure you subscribe and share it with your friends.